At a summit of EU leaders in Brussels, there's been strong criticism of those member states that have continued to support Israel despite the mounting death toll and humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Arriving at the summit, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez described Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide. Leaders are assessing an EU report which concludes that Israel is in breach of the human rights obligations in its trade and political relations with the European Union.
EU leaders have been scrambling to respond to a litany of fast-moving global events. The Israel-Iran war, Gaza, Ukraine, made all the more unsettling by US President Donald Trump's daily brags and outbursts. While all of the above are on the agenda, as well as the momentous NATO summit this week, of key concern to Ireland is how leaders would respond to Israel's alleged violation of the human rights clauses enshrined in Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. There is growing resentment at those member states, Germany, Hungary, the Czech Republic, who have steadfastly blocked tougher action against Israel.
EU as a whole cannot really preach the rule of law anymore due to our inadequate response to the atrocities happening in Gaza. Unfortunately, some of the member states, important member states, decided to give first priority to their own interest and not to the human rights of the Palestinian people.
The Spanish Prime Minister described Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide.
I think it's more than obvious that Israel is violating Article 2. So what I will demand today is that Europe has to suspend the association agreement with Israel, and it has to do it immediately.
Dublin accepts there's simply no unanimity for this. The Taoiseach's approach has been to reassure those countries supportive of Israel that he understands their historical reasons for doing so, while appealing for a change of policy on purely humanitarian grounds.
The people of Europe find it incomprehensible that Europe does not seem to be in a position to put pressure on Israel and leverage on Israel to stop this war in Gaza, to stop the continuing slaughter of children and innocent civilians. The war must stop.
There is one topic where Europe has been united for months, and that's on the need for a ceasefire in Gaza and for a massive increase in humanitarian aid. That unity has had little or no impact on Israeli policy.
And we can get more from Tony now, who's in Brussels this evening. Tony, are EU member states looking at other ways to put pressure on Israel?
Well, they are, Sharon. I mean, the hard reality is that for the EU to strike any decisive policy on foreign affairs, international security issues, they need unanimity. Now, member states are looking at, for example, Norway, Canada, the UK, who have put sanctions on ultra-nationalist members of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet. There is a move by Belgium, which is supported by Ireland, to ask the European Commission to see how EU member states, EU institutions could comply with that International Court of Justice advisory opinion last year, which held that Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal and that no country should facilitate that occupation through trade. Now, the Irish government's view is that the new Occupied Territories Bill is within its own framework legal and should comply with EU law, and it's understood now that a number of other member states are asking the Irish government how exactly that piece of legislation will work. Aside from that, there's growing frustration that many member states still say keep talking to the Israelis, try and convince them to go for a ceasefire, let more humanitarian aid in. More voices now saying that Donald Trump, the US president, is the only person who can really influence Israeli policy, but all of that remains to be seen.
Europe editor Tony Connolly, thank you.